My GF of 5 years won't let me hang out with my best friend for the first time. So, I'll try and fill in as much detail as possible because this situation feels like it's spiraling faster than I can process. To understand where I'm coming from, you need to know a bit about my best friend and me. We've been tight since elementary school, the kind of friendship you only see in movies or hear about in stories people tell years after the fact. He's not just my best friend, he's like a brother to me. The type of guy who knows your deepest secrets, your quirkiest habits, and all the embarrassing stuff you'd never want anyone else to find out. And through it all, he's never judged me for any of it. That's the kind of bond we have. We met on the playground in the 3rd grade. I remember it vividly because I'd just transferred schools and didn't know a soul. I was sitting on the bench, trying to blend into the background when he walked up with this ridiculous grin, holding a stick he'd declared was a sword. "Want a duel?" he asked, and that was it. That's how we became friends. From that moment on, we were inseparable. Every recess, every lunch break, every group project, we were a package deal. As we got older, our friendship evolved, but it never faltered. By middle school, we were thick as thieves, always scheming, pulling pranks, and laughing until our sides hurt. Xbox became our thing, our escape from the monotony of school and life. Countless nights were spent online, trash-talking each other in games, strategizing, or just talking about life. It didn't matter if we were winning or losing, it was the connection that made it special. When high school came around, life got busier, but we always made time for each other. Even as we started dating and exploring new interests, our friendship never wavered. We had each other's backs through breakups, bad grades, and family drama. He was the one I called when my dog passed away, the one who helped me find the courage to ask out my first girlfriend, and the one who never hesitated to roast me for every bad decision I made. The only downside, and it's a big one, is that he lives across the country now. His family moved away just before our senior year, and it felt like losing a limb. Sure, we still had Xbox, and we talked almost every day, but it wasn't the same. No more late-night runs to the gas station for snacks or lazy afternoons binge-watching shows we both pretended not to like. The distance made things harder, but we both worked to keep the friendship alive because that's how much it meant to us. Over the years, life got even busier. College, jobs, relationships, they all pulled us in different directions. But through it all, we stayed connected. It wasn't always easy, though. There were weeks, even months, when we barely spoke, but when we finally caught up, it was like no time had passed. That's the beauty of our friendship. It's solid, unshakable, built on years of trust and shared experiences. This winter, though, something extraordinary happened. He finally got the chance to fly over and visit. It wasn't easy for him to make it work. His job, his family obligations, and the logistics of cross-country travel were hurdles we didn't think he'd clear. But somehow, he made it happen. The minute he told me he'd booked the flight, I was over the moon. It felt like the universe had finally thrown us a bone after years of bad timing and missed opportunities. We started planning immediately. It wasn't going to be a casual hangout, it was going to be epic. A reunion years in the making. We wanted to do all the things we'd talked about but never got the chance to do. A boys' trip to an Airbnb, going to a football game, smoking cigars, and just relaxing. No stress, no drama, just 4 days of pure, unfiltered friendship. It felt like a dream coming true. Something that would remind us both of why we'd fought so hard to keep our connection alive despite the miles between us. The countdown to his arrival started the day he sent me his flight details. I kept imagining how surreal it would be to see him in person again after all these years. Sure, we'd FaceTimed and talked, but there's something different about hanging out in person. The little things, sharing a laugh over a stupid joke, high-fiving after a good game, or just sitting in comfortable silence, those are the moments I missed the most. I knew this trip was going to be special, not just for me but for both of us. It was a chance to take a break from the chaos of life and remember what it felt like to just be ourselves. And honestly, I couldn't wait to show him my world, to let him see the life I'd built and how much he'd been a part of shaping it, even from afar. But as excited as I was, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I knew not everyone was thrilled about this trip, namely, my girlfriend. And while I tried to push those thoughts aside, I couldn't ignore the tension that had started to build every time the topic came up. I had no idea how much of a problem it was going to become. We planned everything meticulously well, as meticulously as two guys who mostly communicate through Xbox and memes can manage. The idea was simple but perfect: 4 days of pure, unfiltered fun. Just me and my best friend, no distractions, no responsibilities, no drama. An urban that would feel like home base, a football game we'd been talking about attending for years, plenty of drinks, and maybe a few cigars for good measure. It wasn't anything fancy, but it didn't need to be. It was about us finally getting the chance to hang out, in person, after years of virtual catch-ups and missed opportunities. The plan felt like a reward for both of us. Life hadn't exactly been kind lately: stress at work, relationships that were more complicated than they should be, and the grind of adulthood that sometimes made it feel like we were losing touch with who we used to be. This trip was supposed to be our escape, a way to reconnect and remind ourselves that we didn't have to take everything so seriously all the time. 4 days of laughing until our stomachs hurt, trash talking over games, and just being the hooligans we used to be in high school. But there was one major complication: my girlfriend. Let's just say she and my best friend have never exactly been on the same page. Actually, that's putting it lightly. They don't get along at all. From the very beginning of our relationship, there was tension between them. She thought he was immature and a bad influence on me. He thought she was controlling and way too serious. It was like oil and water, no matter how much I tried to mix the two. I don't even know when it started. Maybe it was the first time he teased her about something harmless, and she took it personally. Or maybe it was the way she rolled her eyes every time I mentioned his name, like even hearing about him annoyed her. Whatever it was, their dislike for each other only grew over time, and I eventually stopped trying to force them to get along. It was easier to just keep them in separate corners of my life. That's why, when we started planning this trip, I knew from the start that it was better if it was just me and him. Bringing her along would only create unnecessary tension. She'd spend the whole time being a Debbie Downer, as he liked to call it, pointing out every little thing she didn't like, making sarcastic comments about how childish we were being, and generally sucking the fun out of the whole experience. It wasn't that I didn't care about her feelings, I just knew that this trip wasn't the place for her. It was supposed to be a break from all the usual stresses of life, and frankly, she was one of those stresses. But the thing is, I knew how she would react the moment I told her about the trip. She'd be mad, no, furious. She'd throw a fit, accuse me of being inconsiderate, and probably find a way to twist it into a betrayal of our relationship. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to deal with that. Not when this trip was something I'd been looking forward to for months, something that felt like the one bright spot in an otherwise gray winter. The tension between us had already started to simmer when I first mentioned the idea. I tried to ease her into it, bringing it up casually one night after dinner. So, you remember my buddy, right? The one from Xbox? Well, he's coming to visit this winter. We're thinking of doing a little trip, just the two of us, you know, to catch up. Her face immediately darkened, and I knew I was in for it. Just the two of you? She asked, her tone sharp. Why wouldn't you invite me? Or are you just planning to leave me out? It's not like that, I said quickly, trying to calm the storm before it started. It's just, we haven't seen each other in years. It's been forever since we got to hang out, and I thought it would be nice to have some guy time. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. So, you're saying I can't come because I'm not a guy? That's ridiculous. You know how disrespectful that sounds, right? It's not about that, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. It's just, you and him don't exactly get along. I thought it'd be better for everyone if it was just us. Less awkward, you know. Her glare could have cut through steel. So, let me get this straight. You're planning this whole trip, and I'm not invited because you think I'm the problem. Do you even care how that makes me feel? And there it was, the guilt trip I'd been dreading. I tried to explain myself, to tell her that it wasn't personal, but she wasn't having it. She accused me of prioritizing my friend over her, of not valuing our relationship, of being inconsiderate. And then she dropped the bombshell, if you go on this trip without me, don't expect me to be here when you get back. I froze. Was she really threatening to leave me over this? Part of me wanted to call her bluff, to tell her she was being ridiculous and that I wasn't going to let her control my life. But another part of me, one that I hated admitting existed, felt paralyzed by the fear of losing her. We'd been together for 5 years, and while things weren't perfect, I wasn't ready to throw it all away over one argument. At least, not yet. I didn't make any promises that night. Instead, I told her I needed time to think about it, which only made her angrier. The next few days were tense, with her barely speaking to me except to drop passive-aggressive comments about how nice it must be to have such a loyal friend. Meanwhile, my buddy was texting me excitedly about the trip, sending links to Airbnb listings and ticket prices for the game. It felt like I was being pulled in two completely opposite directions, and no matter what I chose, someone was going to end up hurt. When I mentioned this plan, something my buddy and I had been cooking up for the better part of a year, my girlfriend didn't just react badly. She went nuclear. It wasn't the first time we'd argued about my friendship with him, but this was different. This wasn't just a sarcastic comment or a snide remark about how immature we were when we hung out. This was a full-blown threat to end the relationship if I went through with it. Her reasons for being upset felt complicated. On the surface, it was about trust, or at least that's what she said. She had 2 major grievances. The first was her belief that my buddy and I would inevitably end up acting like dumbasses in public. And, okay, she wasn't entirely wrong about that. We do have a history of being loud, obnoxious, and maybe a little too reckless when we're together. But it's all harmless fun. We're not the type to get into real trouble. At worst, we might embarrass ourselves or annoy a waiter by laughing too loud at our own jokes. We've never done anything that would land us in handcuffs or on the evening news. Her second concern hit harder because it felt more personal. She thought I might cheat on her during the trip. That accusation stung. I'd never given her a reason to doubt my loyalty, not once in our 5 years together. Sure, I'm not perfect, and I've made my share of mistakes, but infidelity has never been one of them. The idea that she could even entertain the thought felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just an attack on my character, it was an attack on the foundation of our relationship. I'm not going to cheat on you, I told her, trying to keep my voice calm even though my insides were churning. You know me better than that. Why would you even think that? She crossed her arms, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. It's not just about you. It's about the situation. You'll be out there, drinking, partying, and who knows what could happen. People make mistakes, and I don't trust your buddy to stop you if something did happen. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my frustration. He's not the devil, you know. He's not out here trying to ruin my life. He's just my friend. You're acting like I'm planning some wild bachelor party. It's just a couple of days to relax and catch up. She shook her head, clearly unimpressed by my reasoning. You don't get it. You're not inviting me, and that makes it feel like you are hiding something. Like you want me out of the picture so you can do whatever you want. Her words hit like a gut punch. Was that really how she saw this? As some kind of sneaky ploy to escape her watchful eye? The truth was, I hadn't invited her because I didn't want the drama of her being there, not because I had anything to hide. But trying to explain that without making things worse felt impossible. The worst part was how her ultimatum hung over everything. If you go on this trip, don't expect me to be here when you get back. She said it once, months ago, but it still echoed in my mind every time the trip came up. Was she serious? Or was it just a manipulative tactic to guilt me into canceling? I didn't know. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. Now, with the trip just a month away and tickets for the game selling out fast, I was at a crossroads. My buddy was counting on me, and I didn't want to let him down. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the guilt that came with going behind her back. I kept imagining how she'd react if I just went ahead and bought the tickets without telling her. Would she explode? Would she actually leave me? Or would she let it go once she realized I wasn't budging? The idea of just saying oh well and doing it anyway was tempting, but it also felt wrong. It wasn't who I wanted to be, and it definitely wasn't how I wanted to handle my relationship. But what choice did I have? She wasn't willing to see my side of things, and I wasn't willing to cancel a trip I'd been looking forward to for over a year just to appease her. I started replaying every argument we'd had about the trip in my head, trying to figure out if there was some magic phrase I could say to make her understand. Something that would convince her this wasn't about choosing my buddy over her, it was about preserving a friendship that meant the world to me. But every scenario I came up with ended the same way, with her hurt, angry, and accusing me of being selfish. The double standard didn't help. She'd taken 2 trips without me in the past 5 years, both out of state, both with her friend, and I hadn't said a word against it. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't accuse her of cheating or try to guilt her into staying home. I trusted her because that's what you're supposed to do in a relationship. But when it was my turn to take a trip, suddenly it was a problem. She kept throwing it in my face that she'd invited me to those trips and I hadn't invited her to this one. What she conveniently left out was that I couldn't go because I was working both times. It wasn't like I chose not to go. I didn't have the option. The hypocrisy of it all made my blood boil. How was it fair for her to demand things from me that she wasn't willing to give in return? But no matter how many times I brought it up, it didn't seem to make a difference. She always found a way to twist the argument back to how I was the one being unfair, the one jeopardizing our relationship. I felt like I was being backed into a corner. On one side was my best friend, someone who had been there for me through thick and thin, someone who had never made me feel like I had to prove my loyalty. On the other side was my girlfriend, the person I'd built my life with over the past 5 years, who seemed to think this trip was some kind of personal attack on her. No matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt. And the longer I sat on the decision, the more it ate away at me. I needed to make a choice, and I needed to make it soon. But the question that kept me up at night was, what do I value more, my friendship or my relationship? And was it even possible to have both? Another thing that made this whole situation so frustrating was the double standard. My girlfriend had taken 2 trips without me during our 5 years together. Both trips were out of state, both were with her best friend, and both were completely fine by me. I didn't make a fuss, I didn't get insecure, and I certainly didn't accuse her of anything shady. Why? Because I trusted her. It never crossed my mind to question her intentions, let alone demand she cancel her plans to stay home with me. So why couldn't she extend me the same courtesy? Her excuse was that those trips were different because she'd invited me to join her. What she conveniently left out was that I couldn't go because I was working both times. It wasn't like I chose not to go. I simply didn't have the option. But now that it was my turn to take a trip, the rules had suddenly changed. My trip was different because I hadn't invited her. And even if I had, she wouldn't want to come, given how she felt about my best friend. So what was the point? It was hard not to feel like she was trying to control me. Every argument we had about the trip seemed to boil down to the same thing: she didn't trust me. She kept bringing up the possibility of cheating, which was absurd. Both my friend and I are straight, and there are no feelings between us, none. I even laughed about it at one point, saying, "You know we're not secretly in love, right?" But the joke didn't land. She just gave me that look, the one that said she wasn't amused, and the tension thickened. The thing is, I get that relationships are built on compromise. I get that she has insecurities, just like everyone else. But this felt like more than just a compromise, it felt like an ultimatum. Cancel the trip or risk losing her. And that didn't sit right with me. I loved her, but I couldn't ignore the part of me that felt suffocated by the constant accusations and mistrust. The decision loomed over me like a storm cloud, growing darker by the day. The trip was less than a month away, and the football tickets were selling fast. I knew I had to make a choice, either buy the tickets and deal with the fallout later or cancel the trip and hope it would smooth things over. But no matter how I looked at it, someone was going to end up hurt. And I wasn't sure I could live with the consequences, no matter which path I chose. After days of agonizing over it, I finally sat down with her for one last conversation. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my tone calm and measured. "I need you to hear me out, okay? This trip, it's important to me. My buddy and I have been planning this for a year. It's not about excluding you or disrespecting our relationship. It's about reconnecting with someone who's been a huge part of my life." She didn't say anything at first, just crossed her arms and stared at me, her expression unreadable. I pressed on. "I know you're worried, and I get that. But I've never given you a reason not to trust me. I'm not going to cheat on you. I'm not going to do anything reckless. I just want 4 days to hang out with my best friend and enjoy some time away. That's all." Her silence was deafening, but I kept going. "You've taken trips without me before, and I trusted you completely. I didn't make it about me. I want to believe we can do the same here. I want to believe you trust me enough to let me have this." She sighed, finally breaking her silence. "It's not that I don't trust you," she said, though her tone wasn't entirely convincing. "It's just, I don't know. I feel like this trip is more important to you than I am." "That's not true," I said quickly. "You're the most important person in my life. But this trip, it's not about choosing between you and him. It's about balancing both relationships. Can you understand that?" There was a long pause as she looked at me, her eyes softening just slightly. "I don't like it," she admitted. "But I guess I can't stop you. Just promise me you won't do anything stupid." "I promise," I said, relieved that she seemed to be relenting. "Nothing stupid, I swear." With that, I went ahead and bought the tickets. It wasn't the perfect resolution, and there was still tension between us, but I felt like I'd made the right choice. The trip wasn't about rebelling against her or testing the limits of our relationship. It was about honoring a friendship that had been a cornerstone of my life for years. When the day of the trip finally arrived, I hugged her goodbye and reassured her one last time. "I'll text you, I'll call you, whatever you need," I said. "I just want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us." "Okay," she said, though her voice still carried a hint of doubt. "Have fun. But not too much fun." The trip itself was everything I hoped it would be. My buddy and I laughed until our sides hurt, yelled ourselves hoarse at the football game, and spent hours reminiscing about old times. For those 4 days, it felt like we were kids again, free from the stresses of adulthood and the complications of life. It reminded me why our friendship was worth fighting for, even in the face of obstacles. When I got back, things with my girlfriend were a little rocky at first. She was still distant, still wary, but over time, the tension began to fade. I made a conscious effort to show her that she was still my priority, and slowly, she started to believe it. The trip didn't solve all our problems, but it didn't break us, either. Looking back, I don't regret my decision. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it felt right. Relationships are messy, and balancing love and friendship isn't always simple. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the people who truly matter will find a way to stick around, even when things get tough.